If you ask almost anyone which fighter won the Battle of Britain, they will answer with absolute confidence. The Spitfire. Its elliptical wings have become one of the most recognizable silhouettes in aviation history. It appears in films, museums, documentaries, and victory posters. It became the symbol of Britain's finest hour. There is only one problem. The Spitfire did not shoot down most German aircraft during the Battle of Britain. It wasn't even close. Nearly 60% of all Luftwaffe aircraft destroyed during the battle fell to another fighter. An airplane that looked older flew slower and was already considered outdated before the war had even begun. An airplane many historians now describe as obsolete. The Hawker Hurricane. Without it, Britain almost certainly loses the Battle of Britain. Without it, there is no air superiority over southern England. Without it, the Royal Air Force cannot stop Operation Sea Lion, the planned German invasion of Britain. The Hurricane wasn't the glamorous fighter. It wasn't the fastest. It wasn't the aircraft pilots dreamed of flying, but when Britain needed a machine that could be built quickly, repaired overnight, and survive day after day against the largest air force in Europe, the Hurricane kept showing up. This is the story of the fighter that carried the weight of Britain's survival and somehow became the forgotten hero of the Second World War. The story begins with a man who rarely sought attention. His name was Sydney Camm. Unlike many of aviation's legendary designers, Camm did not come from wealth or elite universities. He was born in Windsor in 1893, the eldest of 12 children. His father worked as a carpenter, and from an early age, Sydney became fascinated by mechanics. While other children built toys, Camm built model aircraft, not decorative models, flying ones. He spent countless hours experimenting with wing shapes, weight distribution, and balance. Every crash taught him something new. By his teenage years, he had already developed a reputation for solving engineering problems through experimentation rather than theory. That approach would define his entire career. In 1923, Camm joined the Hawker Engineering Company. At the time, Hawker was known for building sturdy military biplanes. Britain had emerged from the First World War convinced that the future still belonged to aircraft with two wings. The Royal Air Force agreed. So did most military planners around the world. Speed mattered, but manoeuvrability mattered more, and biplanes delivered both. Throughout the 1920s, Camm became one of Hawker's most valuable designers. Aircraft like the Hawker Hart and Hawker Fury became some of the finest biplanes ever built, fast, reliable, easy to maintain. RAF pilots loved them. Yet Camm noticed something others ignored. Aircraft engines were becoming dramatically more powerful. Metal airframes were replacing wood. Retractable landing gear was beginning to appear. Aerodynamics was advancing faster than military doctrine. The age of the biplane was ending. Many simply refused to admit it. Across Europe, aviation entered a technological arms race. Germany, despite the restrictions imposed after the First World War, quietly rebuilt its aircraft industry. Italy invested heavily in modern fighters. The Soviet Union expanded production at an astonishing pace. Even the United States experimented with faster, all-metal monoplanes. Britain risked falling behind. Ironically, the greatest obstacle wasn't engineering. It was bureaucracy. The Air Ministry remained deeply cautious. Military procurement moved slowly. Every new aircraft required years of testing, evaluation, and debate. Officials worried that abandoning proven biplanes for untested monoplanes introduced unnecessary risks. Many senior officers had spent their careers flying aircraft covered in fabric and supported by struts. The idea of trusting a single wing seemed almost reckless. Sydney Camm disagreed. He believed the future had already arrived. Britain simply hadn't recognised it yet. In 1933, the Air Ministry issued Specification F-3634. It called for something radically different. A high-speed monoplane fighter capable of exceeding 300 miles per hour. It would require 8 machine guns, a retractable undercarriage, an enclosed cockpit, exceptional climb performance, and enough reliability to defend Britain against modern bombers. Most manufacturers hesitated. The requirements pushed existing technology to its limits. Camm did not hesitate. He had already begun sketching exactly such an aircraft. His proposal borrowed lessons from Hawker's successful biplanes while embracing the future. Instead of abandoning proven construction methods entirely, Camm combined old and new. The fuselage used steel tubes. Much of the rear structure remained covered in fabric. The wings were initially fabric covered as well. To some engineers, this looked old-fashioned. To Camm, it was practical. Factories already knew how to build it. Workers already understood the techniques. Repairs could be performed quickly, using tools available at almost any RAF station. He wasn't designing the most advanced fighter. He was designing the fighter Britain could actually build in large numbers. History would prove that distinction mattered more than anyone realised. Power came from a revolutionary engine. The Rolls-Royce PV-12, later renamed the Merlin. When early testing began, the Merlin remained experimental. Its designers believed it could eventually produce over 1,000 horsepower, an astonishing figure for its time. Camm designed his aircraft around the engine before the engine itself had fully matured. It was a gamble. If the Merlin failed, the entire project failed with it. Fortunately for Britain, it didn't. The combination proved extraordinary. The prototype first flew on November 6, 1935. Test pilot George Ballman pushed the aircraft into the sky from Brooklands. Observers immediately noticed something remarkable. This wasn't merely a faster biplane, it was an entirely new generation of fighter. The aircraft exceeded 315 miles per hour. Its climb rate impressed RAF officials. The controls felt stable and predictable. Most importantly, it was forgiving. Average pilots could fly it well. Not every fighter possessed that quality. Around the same time, another prototype appeared, designed by Reginald Mitchell at Supermarine. It was sleeker, faster, more elegant. Its thin elliptical wings minimised drag unlike anything seen before. This aircraft became the Spitfire. Immediately, comparisons began. The Spitfire represented cutting-edge aerodynamics. The Hurricane looked almost conservative beside it. Many inside the Air Ministry assumed the Spitfire represented the future, and the Hurricane merely bridged the gap between generations. They were only partially correct. The Spitfire would indeed become Britain's ultimate interceptor, but it presented a problem. It was extraordinarily difficult to manufacture. Its beautiful wings demanded incredible precision. Production required highly skilled labour. Construction consumed valuable time. The Hurricane looked simpler because it was simpler. Factories could produce it faster. Mechanics could repair battle damage far more easily. Entire sections of the fabric-covered rear fuselage could be patched overnight. A damaged Spitfire often required lengthy factory repairs. A damaged Hurricane frequently returned to combat the very next morning. Nobody considered that advantage glamorous. It would soon become priceless. The RAF placed its first production order before testing had even fully concluded. It was an unusual decision. But Europe was changing rapidly. Across the English Channel, Adolf Hitler openly rejected the Treaty of Versailles. The Luftwaffe expanded at astonishing speed. Messerschmitt introduced the revolutionary Bf 109. A fighter every bit as modern as Britain's newest aircraft. Time was running out. Hawker's factories accelerated production. Workers assembled Hurricanes at a pace Britain had rarely attempted during peacetime. By late 1937, the first operational squadrons received the new fighter. Pilots transitioning from biplanes noticed the difference immediately. The enclosed cockpit felt luxurious. The retractable landing gear reduced drag dramatically. The Merlin engine transformed performance. For many young RAF pilots, it felt like stepping into the future, yet some remained skeptical. The Hurricane lacked the sleek beauty of the Spitfire. Its thicker wings created more drag. Its top speed lagged behind. Many believed the newer supermarine design would soon replace it entirely. They had no idea that within just 2 years, Britain would desperately need every Hurricane it could build. Because while engineers debated elegance, Europe was preparing for war. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. 2 days later, Britain declared war. The Hawker Hurricane, originally viewed as the Royal Air Force's practical stopgap fighter, was suddenly Britain's first line of defence. And within months, it would face a test that no engineer, no pilot, and no government had truly prepared for. The Battle of France was about to begin. When Britain declared war on Germany in September 1939, the Royal Air Force possessed a little over 500 modern fighters. More than half of them were Hawker Hurricanes. The glamorous Spitfire dominated newspaper photographs. The Hurricane filled the squadrons. It was the workhorse from the very beginning. While the world imagined a fast-moving war of tanks and bombers, Royal Air Force Fighter Command prepared for a conflict that looked eerily familiar to the First World War. Intercept enemy aircraft, protect British forces, maintain control of the skies. Few imagined just how quickly those plans would collapse. The first Hurricane victory came only weeks after the war began. On October the 30th, 1939, Royal Air Force pilots intercepted a formation of German Dornier Do-17 bombers over the North Sea. Flying Hurricanes, they shot down several aircraft without suffering losses. It was a small engagement, but it confirmed something important. Britain finally possessed a fighter capable of meeting the Luftwaffe on equal terms. Pilots praised the Hurricane's stable gun platform. Its 8 Browning 303 machine guns delivered an astonishing volume of fire. Each gun fired roughly 1,200 rounds per minute. Together, they could throw nearly 10,000 bullets every 60 seconds. Against lightly protected bombers, the effect was devastating. A short burst could rip through wings, fuel tanks, and engines before the German crew even understood they were under attack. Yet combat also exposed weaknesses. The Hurricane's fabric-covered rear fuselage worried many pilots. Enemy cannon shells could tear through the fabric with frightening ease. Fuel tanks positioned ahead of the cockpit occasionally ignited after being hit. Several pilots escaped burning aircraft with severe injuries. Ground crews responded quickly. Additional armour plates were installed behind the pilot's seat. Self-sealing fuel tanks gradually entered production. Metal-covered wings replaced the original fabric versions. The Hurricane evolved continuously, not because the design was flawed, but because war always teaches lessons faster than peacetime testing. Then came May 10th, 1940. Germany launched its invasion of Western Europe. Within hours, thousands of aircraft filled the skies over Belgium, Luxembourg, France, and the Netherlands. The Blitzkrieg had begun. For the first time, Hurricanes faced the Luftwaffe at full strength. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 immediately proved to be a dangerous opponent. It climbed faster, accelerated more aggressively, and possessed superior fuel injection, allowing German pilots to dive sharply without their engines cutting out. The Hurricane relied on a carbureted Merlin engine. Under negative G-forces, fuel flow could briefly stop. Pilots learned to avoid abrupt pushover dives. Instead, they rolled inverted before diving after German fighters. It was slower, but it kept the engine running. Tiny details like these often determined who lived and who didn't. Despite the disadvantages, Hurricanes fought relentlessly. Again and again, RAF squadrons threw themselves against overwhelming German formations. Often they were outnumbered. Frequently, they flew multiple sorties each day. Losses mounted rapidly, yet so did victories. The Hurricane excelled in exactly the role Fighter Command needed most: destroying bombers. Its stable handling allowed pilots to maintain accurate fire during high-speed attacks. Its thick wings provided a solid firing platform. Unlike the lighter Messerschmitt, the Hurricane remained remarkably predictable under heavy gunfire. Many experienced RAF pilots deliberately ignored escorting German fighters. Instead, they drove straight toward the bombers. Destroy the bombers. And the mission failed. It was brutally simple logic. One pilot demonstrated that philosophy better than anyone. Flight Lieutenant James Nicholson. During one engagement, enemy cannon fire ignited his Hurricane. Flames filled the cockpit. His clothing caught fire. Most pilots would have bailed out immediately. Nicholson stayed. He spotted a nearby Messerschmitt Bf-110. Despite being surrounded by fire, he maneuvered into position and opened fire. The German aircraft crashed. Only then did Nicholson jump from his burning fighter. He survived. For his actions, he received the Victoria Cross. He remains the only fighter command pilot awarded Britain's highest military decoration during the entire Second World War. The Hurricane had become more than an airplane. It had become a machine flown by men willing to stay inside burning cockpits if it meant stopping the enemy. But courage could not stop Germany's advance. French defences collapsed with astonishing speed. British Expeditionary Force units found themselves trapped against the English Channel. Hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers crowded onto the beaches around Dunkirk. If they could not escape, Britain would lose the core of its professional army. Operation Dynamo began on May 26, 1940. The Royal Navy assembled every available vessel: destroyers, fishing boats, pleasure craft, merchant ships, anything capable of crossing the Channel. Above them, the RAF fought one of the most misunderstood air campaigns of the war. Many soldiers waiting on Dunkirk's beaches believed they had been abandoned. They looked into the sky. They saw German bombers. They saw explosions. What they did not see were the Hurricanes fighting thousands of feet overhead. Dogfights often occurred far inland or at altitudes invisible from the beaches below. Pilots engaged German escorts before the bombers reached Dunkirk. If they succeeded, the bombers never arrived. If they failed, the soldiers noticed only the explosions. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding understood the criticism. He accepted it. Better to save the army than win an argument. Between May 26 and June 4th, Hurricanes flew thousands of sorties over northern France. Many squadrons lost nearly half their strength. Some flew 4 or 5 missions every day. Pilots landed only long enough to refuel, rearm and climb back into the cockpit. Fatigue became relentless. Sleep became a luxury. Still, they kept flying. Operation Dynamo succeeded. More than 338,000 Allied soldiers escaped across the Channel. Most left behind their tanks, their trucks, their heavy weapons. But they escaped alive. The men who would later defend Britain had survived. The Hurricanes helped make that possible. The victory, however, came at a terrible cost. France continued collapsing. On June 22, 1940, the French government signed an armistice. Western Europe belonged to Nazi Germany. Britain stood alone. Across the Channel, Adolf Hitler now controlled the coastline from Norway to the Spanish border. For the first time in centuries, a hostile power possessed both the opportunity and the intention to invade Britain. But first, Germany needed control of the air. The Luftwaffe entered the summer of 1940 with enormous confidence. Its pilots had crushed Poland, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, France. Victory followed victory. Many German commanders believed Britain would collapse just as quickly. The numbers certainly favoured them. The Luftwaffe could deploy approximately 2,600 aircraft. Fighter Command possessed barely 700 operational fighters. On paper, Britain should have been overwhelmed. Yet numbers told only part of the story. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding had spent years quietly preparing for exactly this moment. He built an integrated air defence network unlike anything the world had ever seen. Radar stations stretched along Britain's coastline. Observers on the ground tracked incoming aircraft. Telephone lines connected radar operators directly to Fighter Command headquarters. Information flowed continuously. Dowding always knew where German formations were headed. His fighters no longer needed to patrol aimlessly. They launched only when necessary. Every gallon of fuel mattered. Every pilot mattered. Every hurricane mattered. By July 1940, Hurricane squadrons occupied airfields across southern England. Ground crews worked with astonishing efficiency. Many had become experts at repairing bullet holes in fabric-covered fuselages. Entire damaged sections could be replaced within hours. Merlin engines were swapped overnight. Armourers reloaded thousands of rounds of ammunition before dawn. Pilots slept beside their aircraft whenever possible. They knew what was coming. Across the Channel, the Luftwaffe prepared the largest sustained air assault Britain had ever faced. Its objective was clear: destroy Fighter Command, gain air superiority, then launch Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain. The world remembers the Spitfire as the icon of that coming battle. But when the Luftwaffe crossed the English Channel, it would be the Hurricane that met them first. And before the fighting was over, it would destroy more German aircraft than every other British fighter combined. By the spring of 1941, the Battle of Britain was over. The Luftwaffe had failed. Operation Sea Lion, the planned German invasion of Britain, had quietly disappeared. The Spitfire had become the symbol of victory. But the Hurricane wasn't finished. In many ways, its most important work was only beginning. Because once Britain survived, the war stopped being defensive. Now it had to go back to Europe, and that meant taking the Hurricane into a completely different kind of war. The Hurricane had been designed as an interceptor. It excelled at shooting down bombers. It was stable, forgiving, and incredibly accurate. Those same characteristics made it surprisingly effective in another role: ground attack. Instead of hunting aircraft, Hurricanes now hunted tanks, trucks, trains, artillery batteries, and troop columns. They became flying artillery. Unlike the sleek Spitfire, the Hurricane's thick wing allowed engineers to bolt almost anything underneath it. Bomb racks, rocket rails, extra ammunition, additional armour. The aircraft became heavier every year. Ironically, the very characteristics that made it obsolete as a fighter made it perfect as an attack aircraft. In North Africa, the Hurricane entered another brutal campaign: the Western Desert. Thousands of square miles of open sand. No forests, no mountains, nowhere to hide. Aircraft could spot each other from dozens of miles away. Dust destroyed engines. Sand clogged machine guns. Temperatures inside cockpits exceeded 50 degrees Celsius. Pilots often flew with water bottles strapped beside them just to survive. At first, Hurricanes again faced the Messerschmitt Bf-109. But now they were meeting newer variants. The Bf-109F, lighter, faster, far more refined than the aircraft Hurricanes had fought over England. Dogfights became increasingly difficult. RAF pilots quickly realised something. Trying to outfight the Germans was becoming impossible. So they changed tactics. Instead of chasing fighters, Hurricanes concentrated on destroying everything on the ground: convoys, fuel depots, supply trucks, artillery airfields. Every destroyed truck meant fewer bullets reaching the front. Every destroyed fuel tanker meant fewer German aircraft taking off tomorrow. The Hurricane slowly transformed into one of history's first truly effective fighter bombers. Then came another evolution, one that frightened German tank crews more than almost anything flying overhead: the Hurricane Mark IID instead of bombs. It carried two enormous 40mm cannons beneath its wings. Each fired armour-piercing shells capable of penetrating tank armour. Pilots nicknamed it the Flying Can Opener. German soldiers gave it another name: the Tank Buster. The aircraft would dive toward armoured columns at nearly 300 miles per hour. One precise burst, one shell striking the engine deck or turret ring. One tank burning in the desert, pilots learned to attack from the rear where armour was weakest. The missions were terrifying, flying straight toward concentrated anti-aircraft fire at barely 100 feet above the ground. Every machine gun, every rifle, every cannon on the battlefield fired back. Many Hurricanes never returned, but those that did left smoking columns of destroyed vehicles stretching across the desert. Meanwhile, another front demanded aircraft. One far colder, far harsher. The Soviet Union. After Germany invaded in June 1941, Britain rushed aid to its new ally. Among the supplies shipped north through Arctic convoys, hundreds of Hurricanes. To many British pilots, the aircraft was already becoming outdated. To Soviet pilots, it was desperately needed. More than 3,000 Hurricanes eventually reached the USSR. Initially, Soviet airmen appreciated the aircraft's rugged construction. It absorbed punishment that destroyed lighter fighters. It was easy to repair in primitive frontline workshops. Damaged fabric could be replaced with canvas, bullet holes patched overnight, engines serviced in freezing conditions. But Soviet pilots also recognized its weaknesses. Against newer German fighters, it lacked speed, it lacked climb, it lacked firepower. Many Soviet mechanics began modifying their Hurricanes themselves, replacing British machine guns with Soviet cannons, installing different radios, even fitting entirely different propellers. It was no longer simply a British fighter. It became whatever the battlefield demanded. Back in Britain, something remarkable happened. Production never stopped. Factories that had once built Hurricanes around the clock during the Battle of Britain continued rolling aircraft off production lines. Not because they remained the best fighter, but because they remained useful, reliable, affordable, adaptable. The Hurricane had become something military planners loved. Predictable. You knew exactly what it could do, exactly how to repair it, exactly how long it would stay in service. Not every weapon wins by being revolutionary. Some win by always being available. By 1942, however, technology was moving faster than the Hurricane ever could. The Spitfire had evolved through multiple generations. The Mark V, then the Mark IX. Powerful Merlin engines gave way to even larger Griffons. Germany introduced the Fokker-Wulf FW-190. One of the finest piston engine fighters ever built. America arrived with the P-38 Lightning, then the P-47 Thunderbolt. Soon, the P-51 Mustang. Aircraft capable of escorting bombers deep into Germany. Aircraft flying hundreds of miles faster than the original Hurricane. The war had entered another technological era, and the Hurricane simply could not follow. Yet retirement never truly came. Instead, the aircraft quietly disappeared from the headlines while continuing the hardest jobs. Convoy escort, night patrols, training new pilots, protecting shipping, attacking ground targets, supporting amphibious landings. The glamorous missions went elsewhere. The dangerous routine remained. By the time Allied forces landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944, the Hurricane was largely absent from newspaper photographs. The cameras followed Spitfires, Mustangs, Thunderbolts, Typhoons. The Hurricane had become yesterday's hero, still working, no longer celebrated. But numbers tell a different story than photographs. During the war, Hawker built approximately 14,500 Hurricanes. More than half were produced after the Battle of Britain. Thousands served across Africa, the Mediterranean, Burma, India, the Soviet Union. Even aircraft carriers operating at sea. It became one of the most versatile aircraft of the Second World War. Not because anyone originally intended it, because necessity demanded it. By war's end, Hurricanes had destroyed thousands of enemy aircraft, thousands more vehicles, ships, locomotives, artillery batteries, supply convoys. They had fought in every major theatre except the Pacific Islands. They had served with over 30 nations. And yet history remembered another airplane, because history often remembers symbols, not workhorses. But perhaps the greatest irony was still waiting. Because while the Hurricane quietly fought across half the world, its younger brother was becoming one of the greatest fighters ever built. The Hawker Typhoon, then the Tempest. Aircraft descended directly from Sydney Camm's original design philosophy. The Hurricane had not been the end, it had been the beginning, and the man responsible would soon see the full measure of what his first fighter had truly accomplished. By the summer of 1945, the war in Europe was over. Germany had surrendered. The Third Reich had collapsed. Across Britain, victory parades celebrated the aircraft that had defended the nation. The Spitfire stood at the centre of nearly every photograph. Its elliptical wings became the visual symbol of Britain's finest hour. It deserved the recognition. It was one of the greatest fighters ever built. But symbols are not always the same as reality, because if you remove the Hurricane from history, the Battle of Britain becomes almost impossible to win. During the battle, Fighter Command destroyed roughly 1,900 German aircraft. The Hurricane was responsible for around 60% of those victories. Not the Spitfire, the Hurricane. While the Spitfire tangled with the Luftwaffe's elite fighter escorts, the Hurricane carried out the mission that actually mattered. Destroy the bombers, every Heinkel that failed to reach London, every Dornier that never dropped its bombs, every Gunkers, 88 that turned back. Each one represented factories that stayed open, airfields that remained operational, radar stations that continued transmitting, and civilians who survived another day. The Hurricane wasn't glamorous, it was effective. Its pilots understood that better than anyone. Many actually preferred flying the Hurricane, not because it was faster, it wasn't. Not because it climbed better, it didn't. But because it inspired confidence. It forgave mistakes, it remained stable under fire. It gave young pilots a fighting chance during the most desperate air battle Britain had ever faced. When your country has only weeks to survive, predictability becomes more valuable than perfection. Sydney Camm watched all of this unfold. Unlike Reginald Mitchell, the designer of the Spitfire, Camm lived to see his aircraft change history. He continued designing fighters throughout the war. The Typhoon, the Tempest. After the war, the Seahawk. Then Britain's first generation of jet fighters. His career stretched from biplanes to the dawn of supersonic flight. Yet despite designing some of the most successful combat aircraft in aviation history, Camm never sought fame. He rarely gave interviews, rarely promoted himself. He simply moved on to solving the next engineering problem. Perhaps that's why the Hurricane inherited the same personality. Quiet, dependable, always overshadowed, always working. Production finally ended in July 1944. By then, 14,583 Hurricanes had been built. They served with more than 30 nations. They fought over Britain, France, North Africa, Malta, Burma, India, the Soviet Union, the Balkans, and the Arctic. Few aircraft of the Second World War served across so many different battlefields. Even after frontline service ended, Hurricanes continued flying as trainers, reconnaissance aircraft, and communications platforms for years. The design simply refused to disappear. Today, only a handful remain airworthy. When one flies, people still stop and watch. The Merlin engine roars exactly as it did in 1940. The fabric-covered rear fuselage still ripples slightly in flight. The thick wings still give it that unmistakable silhouette. It doesn't look as elegant as the Spitfire, it never did. But elegance was never the point. The Hurricane was built to be repaired overnight. Refueled at dawn, and sent back into combat before breakfast. That philosophy saved Britain. History often remembers the extraordinary, the fastest aircraft, the most beautiful designs, the revolutionary inventions. But wars are usually won by something else. Machines that arrive on time, machines that are easy to repair, machines that ordinary people can keep flying under extraordinary circumstances. The Hurricane embodied that philosophy better than almost any aircraft ever built. It wasn't the aircraft Britain dreamed about. It was the aircraft Britain desperately needed. And when the nation stood alone in the summer of 1940, that difference meant everything. The Hawker Hurricane wasn't the wrong fighter because it failed. It was the wrong fighter because on paper it had already been surpassed before the war truly began. A mixed construction of fabric and aluminum. A fixed engineering philosophy in an age moving rapidly toward all-metal, high-performance aircraft. Against newer fighters, it looked outdated. Against history, it proved indispensable. Sometimes the wrong machine arrives at exactly the right moment. Without the Hurricane, there may never have been enough time for the Spitfire to become a legend. Without the Hurricane, there may never have been a Battle of Britain victory at all. It carried the weight of Britain's survival on wings that history too often forgets. And that may be its greatest achievement. If you enjoyed this story and want more deep dives into the aircraft, engineers, and impossible decisions that shaped the Second World War, make sure to subscribe. Every week, we uncover the untold stories behind the machines that changed history, not just how they were built, but why they mattered. And if there's another legendary aircraft you'd like to see next, let me know in the comments.